If you've ever been outside and paid attention to the cars around, you've probably noticed that they've all grown bigger. This is both a good and a bad thing, but it seems like we're edging closer and closer to extreme sizes, which is quite awful. I think there's two types of car size increases. First being models growing over time, and second, large models being launched. So let's just take a look at the former and we'll get back to the latter. When discussing models growing over time, I am talking about cars which have been released on a relatively regular basis. So this eliminates Ford's new Capri from this category, for example, because it's an entirely different car class without any relation whatsoever to the original Capri. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at two main examples of this slow growth, starting with the Mini. Back in the 1950s, 1959 to be precise, BMC was developing the Mini, a compact car for the British. And it was revolutionary. It was hard to fathom how such a small car could be so spacious on the inside, but the answer lies in its engineering. The transversally mounted engine and gearbox coupled with the front-wheel drive layout. Quick note, the Mini wasn't the first car to feature a transversal engine and front-wheel drive. That actually was the Christie in 1909, with the first successful of this type being the 1931 DKV. This was one of the four companies which formed Audi later on. So back to our topic, this allowed for a very large interior in a very compact package. Fast forward to today, the Mini is much larger, which has upset some of its fans, but I'll just say this: safety. I don't think anyone believes this is something we should back out of. Safety is essential when you're traveling in a metal box at high speeds. Even in comparison with 20 to 25 years ago, we have much stronger crash structures, better crumple zones, more airbags, and some new safety tech systems. Could the Mini be a bit minier? Absolutely, but only as long as the cuts do not have a great impact on safety. My second example is the 911. Just like the Mini, the Porsche in question has grown significantly since its first generation. Not only are we talking about safety features, but also larger engines. The 911s are just straying further from what the original stood for. And some are considering the Cayman and Boxster to be closer to the idea of the original 911, a light and agile sports car. Sure, the iconic model has much more power, but is also bigger and heavier, so you're not getting a much better deal if you're looking for that pure driving experience. In short, safety has made all cars grow, from compacts to trucks and even race cars. This is, in my opinion, a very good thing. So now let's get back to the second category. Ever since the 90s, we've seen more and more SUVs and trucks on the road. Now, we're also noticing the rise of crossovers, a mix between hatchbacks and SUVs. There's two components which contribute to the ever-growing number of large cars: the cause and the spiral. The trend started with the Explorer. Once Ford had saw that the segment could use some more comfort and features, their car became an instant hit. If you had a lot of kids in the 90s, you had to choose between a boring minivan with off proportions and a more well-designed SUV. On the other hand, the extra size meant that manufacturers could keep adding comfort features, turning the SUVs into premium cars designed for wealthier buyers. Now that we've set up the premise of why SUVs took off in the first place, let's take a look at its effects, the spiral. Fast forward a couple of years and you see more and more people driving SUVs. If you're in a hatchback, you might ask yourself at some point, am I safe in case of a crash? Off-roaders are much higher off-ground, hitting smaller cars in areas which they shouldn't be hitting, and a large car also has a lot more momentum, so it results in a much safer place for those inside the cabin, but a way more dangerous one for those outside. At this point, you might as well say, I'm going to get a bigger car if that's what keeps me safe. And so on and so forth, till SUVs have a whopping 54% market share in newer sold vehicles in 2024. To demonstrate my point, I will use a magic software called BeamNG, where we can see interesting simulations of how cars collide with one another. We'll run a series of 3 tests with 2 side collisions and also a head-on collision, all of them happening at 100 kilometers an hour, just so we can sort of get an idea of what the damage looks like on a hatchback and what it looks like on a truck. I'll also mention that I don't think, of course, that this is 100% accurate, especially in the frontal collisions, because you don't see as much deformation as you would in a real crash at 100 kilometers. So I think this is under-exaggerated just a bit. How do we fix this? Better yet, why do we need to fix this? Well, besides what we've already gone through, pedestrian crashes are deadlier when a large vehicle is involved. Visibility and dead angles are worse, and you are also polluting way more powering a truck's V8 compared to a sedan's inline 4 engine. How could we fix this? As of now, I think the solution for this situation is a new driver's license system. If we were to restrict the vehicles which you can drive with a normal license to a lower size and weight, as well as introduce a new driver's license, you would see a reduction in SUVs and trucks on the road. This new license should be harder to obtain, limiting the availability of these vehicles for those who don't take the exam and the license. And here's 2 more measures which would help. First, a tax for entering city areas and centers in an SUV or truck, with exceptions for companies which actually need these vehicles, for example, delivery. Second, a lower speed limit everywhere, but only for this category of vehicles, because this is scaling down the inertia of these cars in case of a crash and also making them less desirable for the average person when they have to drive slower. Now, I am aware that any rules like what I've just proposed are unlikely to ever happen, as this would just screw a huge percent of the population around the world. Whether we'll see a gradual return to smaller cars or some enforced regulations, I have no idea. But I still hope that we'll get a return of reasonably sized vehicles, making roads safer for everyone involved.